My neighbor Jeff is a rancher with several hundred acres of pasture. He gave me 3 rounds of freshly cut wood to turn into bowls from a tree that came down on his property. I'll be turning some of that wood into a bowl in this video. The wood is California Bay Laurel. It grows happily along creek beds or in redwood forests all over the West. Its leaves are distinctly aromatic, and when I'm cooking, I usually toss 3 or 4 into stews or spaghetti sauces. The native Californians used to eat its berries in the springtime. The Latin name for the bay tree is Umbellularia californica. North of the border, they call it Oregon myrtle wood, but that's just the marketing department showing their envy. Out here in cow country, the local ranchers call it Pepperwood. Now, the wood from any freshly cut tree can contain as much as 70% water. Over time, the water evaporates and the wood dries, eventually settling to about 10%. And in many ways, the most demanding aspect of any woodworking is managing the moisture content of wood. This can be especially true for wood turners. As the freshly cut wood dries out, it shrinks, but it does so unevenly, so it warps and cups and curls. On average, it shrinks 7 times more across the grain than it does along the grain. Now, because bowls are almost always turned from wood held sideways in the lathe, it means that your bowl will move on you. That is, the thinner you turn the walls, the faster the wood dries out. And the faster the wood dries out, the more oval your bowl wants to become. There are several different strategies for dealing with this. First, you can simply let a chunk of wood dry out for a very long time. This works better on some wood than others, but not perfectly for any wood. Sometimes you can wait years for a block of wood to dry out before you turn it, but even then, it will still move on you and contort as you cut away the dry outer wood and expose the inner, moister wood to the air. So lots of turners prefer to turn freshly cut wood that is still wet or green. There are a couple of ways to handle green wood. The boldest approach is to put a block of green wood on your lathe and then just turn the entire bowl very quickly. Yes, the wood will warp and distort as you cut away its bulk, but if you work fast enough, the walls of the bowl will get thin enough to bend instead of crack. In the few hours it takes to turn a bowl this way, you dare not stop, even just for lunch, or it will go too oval to continue working. The more conservative strategy for turning green wood is to do it in 2 separate steps, and this is the method I'm going to use on the Pepperwood in this video. The first step is called rough turning. You turn a green blank into something approximating the final bowl shape. The objective is to get the bowl's walls thin enough to dry out, but still thick enough to resist cracking or splitting. Generally, this means turning the walls to about 1 inch thick. Once the blank is rough turned, you just set it on the shelf and let it dry. And it takes about a year or 2 for 1 inch thick wall to thoroughly dry out. And sure, they'll warp and distort and go all oval on you, but usually the walls are still thick enough to warp without cracking. After a couple of years, the bowl will be a mess, all oval and distorted and misshapen, but it will be dry, and I'll be able to remount it on the lathe and turn it to its final shape with elegant, thin walls. It will turn almost perfectly round, and it will stay that way, mostly. This video only shows the first step of rough turning. Now, I'll make another video to show how I take a thoroughly dry rough bowl and finish turn it into something beautiful and useful. This particular pepperwood tree was sick long before it was cut down. I'm not sure what kind of sickness it was, but it weakened the tree and allowed a fungus to enter the trunk. This fungal infection, called spalting, while bad for the tree, can be very good for the woodworker. Spalting is what created the beautiful dark striations in this piece, and it can always be identified by the characteristic thin streak of black surrounding the discolored area. Now, too much spalting ruins the wood, but if it's caught in time, spalting adds quite a bit to the beauty of the wood. This roughly turned pepperwood bowl can join with its brothers to sit quietly in a corner of the workshop, slowly drying out until it's ready for finish turning in a year or two. Sometimes a rough turn blank might sit around for several years before it gets its final turning, so I write on it the date I rough turned it and the type of wood. Thanks for watching.